This month on The Compliance Life, I visit with Valerie Charles. Valerie has one of the most interesting journeys to and from the CCO chair. After sitting in the CCO chair, she realized the need for an integrated tech solution for compliance, so she went to a tech startup, GAN Integrity. She then moved to consulting at StoneTurn. We conclude this month with Valerie Charles on The Compliance Life by looking at the CCO function in 2025 and beyond. I know you'll enjoy this month on The Compliance Life. In Part 1, Academic Career and Early Professional Life.
The Compliance Life details the journey to and in the role of a Chief Compliance Officer. How does one come to sit in the CCO chair? What are some of the skills a CCO needs to successfully navigate the compliance waters in any company? What are some of the top challenges CCOs have faced, and how did they meet them? These questions and many others will be explored in this new podcast series. The Compliance Life is hosted by Tom Fox, and each month he'll present the story of one CCO through 4 episodes. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
We're going to have a quick word from our sponsor, and they'll be right back with Valerie Charles on The Compliance Life.
This is it. The putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software? To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. NetSuite is the #1 cloud financial system to power your growth. With visibility and control of your financials, inventory, HR, planning, budget, and more, NetSuite is everything you need to grow, all in one place. With NetSuite, you can automate your processes and close your books in no time, while staying well ahead of your competition. 93% of surveyed businesses increased their visibility and control after upgrading to NetSuite. Over 27,000 businesses already use NetSuite. And right now, through the end of the year, NetSuite is offering a one-of-a-kind financing program to those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/C-Suite. Head to netsuite.com/C-Suite for special end-of-year financing on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. netsuite.com/C-Suite.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back again for another month on The Compliance Life. This month, I'm thrilled to have my good friend and colleague, Valerie Charles. I'm not quite sure how long I've known Valerie, but it's been many years in the compliance profession. I've wanted to have her on this series for a long time, and I finally was able to get her. So, Valerie, first of all, welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your story with us.
Thanks, Tom. I'm super happy to be here. This is kind of a fun thing to do, to think back through everything in your career.
So could you start off by telling us about where you grew up and then going to college? You have some experience in dance, and maybe talking about your early academic life and then your early professional career.
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in East Tennessee, a town called Johnson City, which is one of the Tri-Cities, probably most famous for fast car racing, the Bristol Motor Speedway. So long and short is I was a part of a dancing studio. And so I had a lot of experience in bigger cities like New York and LA, taking classes and performing and doing some things like that, competing. And so I knew that I wanted to go to a big city, a big city. I really only applied to undergrad in New York and Los Angeles, and ended up going to Occidental College in LA and working at a studio called Edge in Hollywood on the dance side of things. So I was studying political science in school and then studying dance separately.
So what was your undergrad degree in?
So what happened is I was studying political science and religion mainly, and then I ended up transferring for my junior year. I went to DePaul University in Chicago, and then I did my senior year at NYU London, which transferred credits back to DePaul. And when I made the change from Occidental to DePaul, it created a situation where I had to change my major from political science to American studies if I wanted to graduate on time. So technically my degree is in American studies, but it's mainly a kind of a poli-sci degree.
What led to the interest in law school?
So first my dad is a lawyer, and he practices, I think, what some small town people call door law, which is he takes clients, whoever comes in the door. And he was a really kind of inspiring person just because he did it all himself. His dad died in World War II when my dad was 3 years old. And so my dad went to undergrad on the GI Bill and then went to law school on scholarship. And so he loved his career and he liked kind of being his own person. He was not a person who loved authority. And so I think working for himself worked for him. And I always found that appealing. Then I worked after undergrad. I worked in civil rights. I worked for a civil rights law firm in LA, which is still in existence. I worked for a guy called Will Harris in Pasadena, who's a great lawyer. He had been in big law and then made the change to do kind of plaintiff side Title VII employment work, and then also some police misconduct cases. We had some really kind of very moving taser and shooting LAPD cases that were, highly publicized and all that. And I just realized, part of my job as a non-lawyer working for a lawyer in that space was spending time with a family and also kind of the non-legal parts of advocacy in the job. And so really, I think I fell in love with advocacy first and foremost, and that made me feel like law school was going to be the right decision.
Where'd you go to law school, Val?
I went to Cardozo, Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law, which is part of Yeshiva University in New York City. It's a great school. It's a really, really, really great school. I think everybody in New York knows that. I think sometimes outside of New York, it doesn't get quite the acclaim, maybe just because it's so religiously affiliated, but it was a great education. And also it's a tight-knit community. So it was really good in terms of graduating and having a lot of good options and Cardozo alumni that were very, very helpful.
Could you tell us or give us a little bit of sense of your law school experience? With most law schools are much smaller than undergraduate programs, and so you do tend to have a fairly tight-knit community. And within the group you're in at law school, whether it may be in your section or a study group or something like that. But what was that like when you overlaid the religious component?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I think when I was at Cardozo, it was probably half maybe of the population of students was non-Jewish. And so, it wasn't like it was a strange thing not to be Jewish. But at the same time, I mean, I did take a couple of classes on kind of Judaism and law and things like that. I found it all really interesting. I also have a whole lot of Orthodox religious friends. So I've been to a lot of Orthodox religious weddings and learned a lot about kind of lesser known Jewish holidays. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was a great experience all around. And I think, I don't know, I think Cardozo, I was glad that it was small and not a huge school. I think those of us who went there do have kind of that feeling like we, really know each other well.
Or graduating from law school and moving into private practice, what types of cases did you work on?
Yeah, so I never thought I would go to big law, to be honest. I really expected myself to go to a public defender office. That's just kind of what I thought I would do. I had worked, in addition to the civil rights work I had done, I had worked at the Innocence Project with Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld during law school as a clinic. And I had the luck, really, of being a part of an exoneration in Rochester of a guy called Doug Warney. And, again, it just really made me want to work kind of against the system on behalf of people. And so I applied actually at several public defender offices, and I also applied in big law. And obviously, you have, not everybody, but I had a lot of debt coming out of law school. And so it was attractive to go to the big firm and still know that you could get into white collar work. I would have gone probably to the Bronx Defenders had they offered me a job. They didn't. And so I went to Buchanan, Ingersoll and Rooney, which was a big law firm where I started working with a guy out of Philadelphia called Bill DiStefano, who's a great white collar lawyer. And I found the entire experience really interesting because it was a lot still advocacy. You know, when you're kind of up against the federal government, which usually my work was DOJ rather than SEC, you realize that it doesn't matter who you are. You know, it doesn't matter if you're an executive at a corporate. It's sort of a very scary thing to be accused of a federal crime. And, you know, not all of our work was federal, but I would say most of it was federal. Shortly thereafter, I moved to a couple of different law firms. The last firm I was at was called Edwards Wildman, which has since been acquired by Locke Lord out of Texas. And I worked there at a couple different firms with a guy called Carlos Ortiz, who had been kind of underneath Chris Christie as the head of the criminal division in Jersey for a number of years. So he was really, you know, a 20-year plus federal prosecutor. And I learned a lot more about kind of, you know, how the system works and working for Bill DiStefano and Barry Slotnick is a very different animal than working for Carlos Ortiz. I think it's just a different approach to the work, to work with people who have been spent a lot of time in the government versus people who kind of really view themselves as, you know, just staunch kind of anti-government defense lawyers. But I liked both. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot from both sets of people that I worked with. And yeah, it was great. I mean, I did a lot of wire fraud. I did a lot of internet gambling, and I definitely did a lot of FCPA. You know, the anti-corruption work really became probably my favorite. And I found it to be good in terms of advocacy, but also really good in terms of just intellectual stimulation. You know, you're not, you know, I think if you do work in a defender's office, it's not that it's boring, but you know, you do see a lot of the same kind of crimes again and again. I mean, I have several colleagues who kind of say, you know, after so many years, it is kind of repetitive work. And I think what's cool about white collar work is that it's never, never, never boring. I mean, really trying to go back and figure out what happened, how did this happen, and more importantly, how do we put you in the best light we can, you know, in front of the government. And which person, if it's a corporate defendant, you know, which person do we put in front of the government? Who has the best likelihood of coming off, you know, in the way that we want you to come off, which is usually sorry. So it's, you know, there's a lot of psychological work that goes along with this kind of stuff. And I've always really enjoyed it.
So I've talked to a lot of people who started out in private practice, either gravitated or were pulled into kind of a white collar type practice, and then from there gravitated into compliance. And almost to a man or woman, they say they found a passion around compliance because of the nature of the work. You certainly mentioned that, but you had one other point that I have not heard, which was the intellectual component of compliance. I was wondering if you could speak a few words about really what excited you intellectually and what challenged you intellectually in compliance.
Yeah. So, you know, my first compliance job was at a company called AGT International, which is a Swiss company with a lot of Israeli management. And so I spent a lot of time once I pivoted sort of figuring out the business. You know, really trying to understand, I think, you know, to do anything to mitigate risk, you have to obviously identify where the risk is specific to that business. And I think what was intellectually rewarding was learning about the business. I mean, I've said this, I think, on other podcasts with you, Tom, but I think the best compliance people are truly hand-in-hand partners with the business. I think you can't do this job properly without being in the weeds and really understanding the drivers of the business. You know, what is motivating individuals, whether they're salespeople, marketing people, and whoever they are, and actually what's important in terms of revenue goals and what's, you know, where are these pressure points that we're likely to see problems because of the way that the business is operating. And I think, you know, it's like getting an MBA. I mean, you really, with every client matter that you have, you're deep in understanding how the business works, how the money flows through the business, and what is motivating various players kind of along that revenue streamline. And so that's an intellectual exercise. It's a fun exercise. It's kind of like solving a puzzle a little bit. And it's different than legal, because I think with legal, you can do a great job in a little bit more of a silo, and it's not that you're entirely siloed. I mean, obviously, to do a good job as a lawyer, you obviously have to understand the business, but I think it's a little bit different because you're not operationalizing your work. You're doing your work, and then you're explaining what the risk profile is to somebody else, and they can assume that risk or not assume that risk, based on what you've told them. I think with compliance, it's different because you're not just providing the information to somebody else, upon which they then make decisions. You're instead going and implementing all the mousetraps everywhere and the controls everywhere. And to do that, to operationalize the advice, I think requires a different level of understanding of the business, of the weeds, the details of the business. And I think that makes the job really dynamic, really fun, really challenging.
Well, Valerie, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us for episode 2 when we come back next week, and we're going to talk about your move from in-house to a tech startup. I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Me too. Thanks, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to this episode of The Compliance Life. I hope you will join me again next week, where I take up another episode in The Compliance Life. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you would like to be featured on The Compliance Life, please give me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, if you like this series, please give us a rating on iTunes. Any review and rating would definitely help get the word out about the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks again.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.